One of the main ways in which the concept of the sociological imagination gets explained is to refer to the argument made in the 1950s by an American sociologist, C.Wright Mills, where he talks about sociology being concerned to connect private troubles to public issues. That's a formula that's actually quite powerful, that can be used in a number of ways. It's trying to say that what sociologists do is take the experience that people have, that they perceive as private, as unique to them individually, and to work out how those private experiences are in fact shared by lots of other people. It also looks at what that means for how you then understand those supposedly private troubles as being in fact public issues. This idea was expressed in the work of the French sociologist Émile Durkheim on suicide. He argued that suicide is perhaps the most intensely individual experience, but that it is in fact also a social phenomenon because you can see patterns in the kinds of people who commit suicide. For example, more males commit suicide than females by a ratio of about 3 to 1. Why is that? If suicide was a genuinely random individual act, there would be no systematic differences like that. You wouldn't see a difference in different religious groups, in different regions, different countries. This is Durkheim's point. As soon as you can see larger scale patterns in behaviour, then it's no longer an individual issue. It's in fact a social one. And that's what he means by thinking in terms of society. Another example is the difference between thinking in terms of this image and whatever emotions, thoughts or responses that image might evoke in you, and this one. The whole point is to be able to see the connections between these two types of images. What the second one does is to talk about being unemployed, being homeless, in terms of the social background of the people concerned. It's basically trying to show that the degree of education one has makes a significant difference to the way you experience that kind of problem. It's also important, I should stress, to be able to go from the second image back to the first, to be able to see the human side of those figures. Ideally, one attempts to engage with both aspects of any social issue or problem. The basic point about the sociological imagination, then, is that there are social institutions and processes, social structures that exist over and above all of us as individuals. To even think in terms of something like society or the social is a large part of what sociologists are trying to do. Often if you encounter an issue or a problem in public debate, it tends to be explained in terms of individual choices or character, and then you as a sociology student can say, but no, there are these social institutions and structures that make things happen in a particular way, or this is part of a much longer term historical process and one should take that into account. An example of the issue is celebrity. We tend to respond to celebrities as individuals without much discussion of them as a social type, with shared characteristics, a certain social function that we need to pay attention to if we're to understand what is really going on with celebrity. There's an economics to celebrity, there's a politics to it, there's a reason why every US president these days wants to have a particular pop star or a film star associated with them during election campaigns. So there's a much more sociological way of understanding a topic like celebrity, and that's true of many other topics. A central feature of sociological thinking then is that it's anti-individualistic. By this I mean that sociologists always look for alternatives to explaining any question about human behaviour in terms of individual or psychological characteristics. This makes sociology quite different from psychology, which usually attempts to describe and explain individual behaviour without reference to larger scale processes and institutions. Or economics, which operates with a model of human behaviour which simply assumes that people behave rationally to maximise their interests, without examining the cultural forms which lead them to behave apparently irrationally. Also overlooked are the social structures which allow some groups of individuals to maximise their interests more effectively than others, for example by virtue of their class position. This is often referred to in sociology as the problem of power in society. So sociologists are always trying to look beyond or behind individuals to see what it is about their social position, their social relationships with complex networks of people around them that socially produce them as people. The supposed power of a king, queen or president, for example, isn't contained by that person. It's a product of the whole network of people around them. This is one reason why many Americans are frustrated by their political system. They're caught up in the idea that the president is powerful, which would mean that it really matters which individual one elects. To some extent that's true. Think of George W. Bush. But that's because one is also electing a whole network of people into powerful positions. And even then, those people are dependent on all sorts of other parts of the US political system, Congress, Senate, not to mention the media and today's social media. Now, just to emphasize how one can have different ways of seeing the same thing, take a look at this image. It's possible to see two different things. Take a look. What do you see? Some of you will see a vase, and others will see two faces. Which did you see? This is just an extremely simple example of how it makes a difference cognitively what you happen to put in the foreground or in the background of what you're thinking about, and that you're generally not conscious of how you do that. What applies to the simple example of a line drawing also applies to more complex questions like how one explains crime, terrorism, government and corporate corruption, or genocide. Sometimes people will just want to know the right answer to sociological questions and feel frustrated when their sociology teacher won't give it to them. But there are no right answers in sociology. There are only better or worse, more or less persuasive explanations, theories, or ways of arguing your case. A large part of what we're trying to do in teaching you sociology is teaching you how to argue for one particular understanding of things, and to do it in a persuasive way, to do it in a way that will be reasonably persuasive for anyone interested in that kind of topic. So we're teaching you how to use data, evidence, whatever kind of material you can assemble, what we call doing research, in order to substantiate the things you want to say about any topic. It's also important here to keep in mind the distinction between having opinions and having arguments. The difference between the two is that arguments are supported by evidence, by research, by what other people have said, and it's possible to challenge the argument on the basis of data and evidence. So one can say in response to an argument about a social issue or problem, instead of just, "No, I don't agree," you can say, "No, that's not right," or "Yes, that is right, because the evidence shows that," etc. The aim in studying sociology is to make you a critical thinker who can identify, understand and explain the underlying dynamics of social change, so that you can help develop the solutions that we need to address the various problems produced by changes and transformations in society, culture, economics and politics. In summary, I talked first about how a useful way to grasp the idea of the sociological imagination is to see sociology as attempting to work out the ways in which apparently private troubles are also public issues. Second, one example was suicide, which, although it appears to be intensely personal, also shows social patterns in rates of suicide in different social groups. Third, sociologists generally look beyond individuals to see what social forces lie underneath people's lives as individuals. Fourth, sociologists rely heavily on evidence and data in supporting their arguments, but even then there's rarely a single right answer to a sociological question, because there's usually more than one way to read the evidence.